I can still hear his footsteps, small, steady. Too slow for a child in a hurry, and too fast for something that shouldn't be walking at all. I was alone in the 4th floor corridor when he appeared. I don't know where he came from. I didn't hear a door open, didn't hear the elevator arrive, didn't hear anything beyond the usual hum of the hospital lighting. And then he was just there, back to me, perfectly still, staring at the wall at the end of the hallway, as though waiting for it to open. He was around 7, maybe 8, dark hair, unwashed, light blue pajamas, the kind hospitals give to admitted children, with a little star print that had been washed so many times, the white had faded to sand. I said hello. He turned around slowly, and that's when I realized something was very, very wrong. When you've worked 6 years in a public hospital, you learn to tell the difference between types of silence. There's the silence of a quiet night shift, the kind you hold on to like a rare gift when all the patients are sleeping. The machines are breathing at the right rhythm, and you actually manage to drink your coffee while it's still hot. There's the tense, electric silence that comes before an emergency, when every person on that floor seems to enter high alert before any alarm sounds. And there's a silence I only learned to recognize after it was already too late. The silence of something being wrong in a way that has no name in the hospital protocol manual. That night started with the first kind. It was Thursday, March 23rd. I know the date because compulsively noting things down is a habit I developed in nursing school and never managed to shake. Every shift handover, I write the date, the time, the floor temperature, the number of admitted patients, and anything that strikes me as relevant in the small black notebook I keep in my scrubs pocket. That night, I wrote 03:23. Tratifhat tiur Twitter tuning. PM F4. Disin patients. Regular charge nurse. On medical leave. Shift covered by me. The regular charge nurse of the 4th floor had been on medical leave for 3 weeks. Knee problem. Scheduled surgery. Nothing critical. But her absence on that specific Thursday meant I was covering a floor that wasn't mine, in a ward I only knew superficially, with a team that wasn't my usual team. The 4th floor of San Geronimo Municipal Hospital is the adult internal medicine ward. No ICU, no neonatal unit, no emergency, longer stays, chronic cases, patients who sometimes stay for weeks, sometimes months. The rhythm is different from the ER where I normally work. Slower, more predictable, quieter. It should have been a calm night. The main corridor of the 4th floor is shaped like an inverted L. The elevator entrance is on the horizontal section, where the break room, the nurses' station, and the staff bathroom are also located. The vertical section, the one that tapers toward a gray metal door at the far end, is where rooms 2 through 18 are. The lighting in that section was dimmer than it should have been. I noticed that as soon as I arrived, 2 of the fluorescent panels were malfunctioning, flickering at irregular intervals that created a strange sensation of movement in the space, as though the corridor was breathing. They've been like that for weeks. The nursing technician handing off the shift told me. Her name was Rita. She was around 40, hair always pulled into a tight bun, with the permanent expression of someone who is mildly irritated with the universe. I've called maintenance 3 times. They come, look, say they'll change the bulb, and then disappear. She shrugged. You get used to it. I said I understood. But that night, as I walked the corridor doing my initial rounds, I did not get used to it. The panels flickered in the wrong rhythm, sometimes 2 at once, sometimes one alternating with the other. And the effect, I know this will sound dramatic, but it's exactly what I felt at the time. The effect was that the corridor was longer than it should have been. That somewhere beyond that gray metal door at the far end, something was waiting to be noticed. I shook my head, finished my rounds, and went back to the station. It was 11 p.m. I need you to understand the layout of San Geronimo Municipal Hospital because it matters. It matters a great deal for what happened afterward. The hospital was built in the 1960s and renovated inconsistently over the years. A new bathroom here, a procedure room expanded there, a wall knocked down with no adequate structural planning elsewhere. The result is a building that looks reasonable from the outside and is mildly labyrinthine inside, floors that don't connect the way you expect, staircases that appear where you wouldn't expect stairs, corridors that end abruptly at locked doors, whose keys nobody knows the whereabouts of. The basement is the most extreme example of this. San Geronimo Hospital has 2 basement levels. The first is where the laundry, the industrial kitchen, the stockroom, and the sterilized materials center are located. A functional floor, noisy, always busy during the day, and half deserted at night. The second basement is older. It existed before the last major renovation was partially decommissioned when the hospital gained a new surgical wing in the 90s and now functions as a kind of liminal zone. Part storage for obsolete equipment, part physical records, archive dating back to before computerization, and part. This is what concerns us. Morgue. The morgue at San Geronimo is not one of the places they show you on the orientation tour for new employees. Technically, it's still operational. Deaths that occur in the hospital are sent there while awaiting removal by a funeral, home, or family authorization for body release. But it's a minimal space, poorly lit, accessed by a staircase that descends from the first basement and by an old service elevator that most employees swear they've never used. The door that provides access to the basement service elevator is at the back of the 4th floor. Specifically, it is the gray metal door at the end of the vertical section of the L-shaped corridor. Hold on to that. The first time I heard the sound was at 12:47 a.m. I was at the nurses' station updating records in the system. One of the less glamorous parts of the job, but one that requires precision because any error in a recorded dosage can have serious consequences. Rita had gone out to do the midnight rounds. There were only the 2 of us on the floor at that hour, plus the on-call doctor, Dr. Alves, who was sleeping in the break room and whose snoring I could faintly hear through the thin wall. The sound was a thud, single, coming from somewhere in the corridor. The kind of thud a door makes when it closes with more force than intended, or the kind an object makes when falling from a medium height to the floor. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming in itself. In any hospital environment, unexpected noises are part of the standard audio landscape. But I looked toward the corridor anyway, instinctively, the way you check a notification without thinking. The corridor was empty. The fluorescent panels continued flickering in their asymmetric rhythm. The room doors were closed. Nothing was out of place. I went back to the computer. 30 seconds later, I heard footsteps, small, steady, coming from the far end of the corridor, moving toward the station. My first thought was that it was a patient. It had happened before, on other shifts, on other floors. Patients waking up in the middle of the night, disoriented, and leaving their rooms without warning. My second thought, immediate right behind the first, was, wait, the fourth floor is adult internal medicine. There are no children here because the footsteps were small. It wasn't the weight and rhythm of an adult. It was a child's step. Light, with that slightly uneven cadence small feet have when walking down a hospital corridor at 1 a.m., wearing socks or slippers that are a size too large. I slowly stood from the chair and looked into the corridor. He had his back to me at the far end of the corridor, maybe 15 meters away, standing beneath the panel that flickered most frequently. Back to me, perfectly still, a child, a boy. By the size and posture, shoulders slightly dropped, legs together, arms hanging along his sides, with that characteristic limpness of someone who is very tired or very lost. Dark hair, unwashed, the kind that hasn't been combed in days. Light blue long-sleeved pajamas with the elastic waistband sitting slightly crooked on the left side. I guessed 7, 8 years old. Could have been slightly less, could have been slightly more. Children are difficult to gauge from a distance, especially in a poorly lit corridor. "Hi," I said. My voice came out lower than I intended, as though part of me already knew that speaking louder would be a mistake. "You okay?" He didn't respond immediately. For a second, maybe two, he stayed completely still, like a photograph, as though my voice had frozen the air around him. And then slowly, he began to turn. The turn was strange. It wasn't the quick, elastic movement children normally have, that energy that seems to overflow into every gesture. It was slow, far too slow for the age he appeared to be. First the right shoulder, then the torso, then the face, as though each part of the body needed a separate instruction in order to move. When he was fully facing me, I needed a moment to process what I was seeing. He was beautiful. That's the first thought I had, and I remember it clearly because it struck me as strange to have that thought in that moment. But he was. He had a beautiful face, delicate features, high cheekbones, a small nose, the kind of face that in normal circumstances you would look at and think, what a lovely child. But the eyes were the problem. They were large and dark, brown, so deep it nearly looked black under that unstable light. And they were looking at me with an expression I had never seen on a child's face. Not fear, not confusion, not that vulnerability typical of a lost child, alone in an unfamiliar place at 3 a.m. Exhaustion, a weariness so absolute, so far beyond what any 7 or 8-year-old should be capable of feeling, that it pressed against my chest before I could even articulate why. It was the kind of exhaustion you see in the very sick, the very old, the kind that seems to come from somewhere deeper than the physical body, as though he had been carrying something too heavy for too long and the weight had finally started showing in his face. And then he opened his mouth. "Can you walk me down?" he said. The voice was low, hoarse, not the way children get hoarse from crying too much or having a cold, the way voices get when they haven't been used in a very long time. "Down," I repeated, "to the morgue." He said the word without hesitation, without the pause a child would make when pronouncing a term that doesn't usually belong in everyday childhood vocabulary. He said it the way you say kitchen or bathroom, a familiar place, a known destination. "I need to go to the morgue." "Will you take me?" We have protocols for nearly everything in a hospital. Unresponsive patient, protocol. Fall from bed, protocol. Unauthorized visitor after hours, protocol. Fire, infectious outbreak, critical medication shortage, protocol, protocol, protocol. The existence of protocols is reassuring because it eliminates the need to improvise under pressure. You don't have to think, you execute the sequence, and the sequence carries you through. There is no protocol for an unidentified child in the adult internal medicine corridor at 12:52 a.m. asking to be taken to the morgue. What I knew from the closest available protocol was this: unaccompanied minor in a hospital area. Alert security plus attempt to identify the minor plus do not leave the child alone. 3 clear steps. I leaned on them mentally, like someone leaning on a safety railing. "What's your name?" I asked, taking a step toward him. My voice was steady. "Professional." I was in work mode, that mode you develop as a survival mechanism, the one that switches off part of your emotions to let your reasoning operate. He looked at me, those dark, exhausted eyes fixed on mine. "Gabriel." A pause. "You don't need the last name." The statement. It wasn't a refusal. It was almost a correction, as though he were adjusting a question I had asked incorrectly. Made me pause for a second. Children don't speak like that. Children of 7, 8 years old, in a hospital, in the middle of the night, lost or frightened, don't speak with that flat, direct calm. They cry, they yell, they demand their mother or father. They get aggressive or freeze completely. They don't stand in a dark corridor saying, "You don't need the last name," as though they're managing a conversation. "Gabriel," I repeated, "where did you come from? Which room is your guardian in?" "I don't have a room." He looked at the floor for a moment. The first gesture. That seemed genuinely childlike since I had seen him. and then brought his eyes back to mine. I need to go down. It's important. I should have called security immediately. I know that now. I know it with the absurd and useless clarity of hindsight. The clarity that only exists after things have already happened and serves only to torment whoever possesses it. I should have picked up the radio on my belt, pressed the button, and said, "Unidentified boy on the 4th floor. I need security support." 15 seconds of action. That's all I needed to do. Instead, I did what most people would do when faced with a small child with a sad expression. In an empty corridor at 3 in the morning, I moved closer. I crouched to his level. Gabriel, I can't take you to the morgue, but I can help you find your family. Did someone come here with you today? He watched me for a few seconds without responding. At this closer distance, 2 meters, maybe 1.5, I could see details I hadn't noticed before. His skin appeared cold. Not the coldness of someone who'd come in from outside, but different. A pallor that seemed to come from within, like wood painted white, lips slightly dry. A thin dark stripe on his left wrist. An old bruise, already in the reabsorption phase. Yellowish at the edges. "Nobody came with me," he said. "Then how did you get in here?" "Through the corridor." Said as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Then he added, still in that flat tone, "You're afraid of me." It was not a question. "I'm worried about you," I said, which was true, but not the complete answer. He nodded slightly, like someone receiving information and filing it away. Then he looked over my shoulder in the direction of the gray metal door at the end of the corridor. "You're going to walk me," he said. Still no inflection, still no threat. "Not right now, but you will." In the 40 minutes that followed, Rita, who had returned from her rounds and been just as unsettled as I, was to find the boy in the corridor, and I did everything that was protocolically correct. We called security. 2 guards came up within 6 minutes. We woke Dr. Alves, who briefly examined the child. Noted he was physically stable, no obvious signs of acute trauma, normal blood pressure, no fever. We called the pediatric wards on the 2nd and 3rd floors. No male patient named Gabriel had been admitted in the last 30 days. We checked the day's visitor logs. No unaccompanied child had entered the hospital on that date. We contacted the regulatory center to check for any missing minor reports in the last few hours. Nothing. Gabriel cooperated with all of it. He sat in a chair at the nurse's station, hands in his lap, answering the guards' questions with that unnatural calm that unsettled me more than any agitation would have. Yes, he was fine. No, he was not in pain. No, he didn't know his home address. No, he didn't know his parents' phone numbers. "Do you have a mother and father?" one of the guards asked. "I had," Gabriel said. The guard looked at me. I looked at Dr. Alves. Dr. Alves looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone who wished they were anywhere else in the universe. "Had," the guard repeated. "What happened to them?" They left." Gabriel looked at his own hands. Those small hands with a slightly whitened skin, and then looked specifically at me. Not the guard, not Rita, not Dr. Alves. at me, the same way I'll be leaving soon. I just need to go down first. By 2 a.m., with Gabriel still sitting at the station, security had contacted the on-call Child Protective Services. In cases of a minor found in a situation of abandonment or without identification, that's the correct step. They activate the child protection mechanisms and send a representative to assume temporary custody. The CPS representative said they would arrive within 2 hours, so it was just us. Me, Rita, the boy with the ancient eyes, and the corridor that kept flickering. I tried to make conversation, asked if he wanted water. He said no. Asked if he wanted a cookie from the break room. He said no. Asked if he wanted to watch TV on the small set in the waiting area. And he looked at me with that expression of eternal exhaustion and said, "You don't need to entertain me." "I'm not trying to entertain you," I said. "I'm trying to keep you company." Something shifted in his face when I said that. Something subtle, almost imperceptible. A slight easing of the muscles around his eyes, as though a tension that had always been there had given way by just a millimeter. "Company," he repeated, as though testing the taste of the word. Yes, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It's been a very long time since anyone did that." And it was the first thing he'd said that sounded completely, painfully human. But it was also the thing that kept me awake for weeks afterward. Because children of 7, 8 years old don't say, "It's been a very long time," about things that have happened to them. They don't have that temporal perspective. They live in the now, the yesterday, the tomorrow. A child's very long time is weeks, maybe months. The way he said it, that inflection, that depth, sounded like years. It sounded like decades. At 2:40, Rita went to do the 2:30 rounds. I stayed at the station with Gabriel. He started talking, not in a linear way, not in the organized manner adults use when telling a story. It was fragmented, with long, unannounced pauses in the middle of sentences, with detours into details that seemed irrelevant before, revealing themselves to be central. It was the way children talk when processing something too large to be told in any ordered sequence. He told me he'd been in the hospital a long time. He couldn't or wouldn't say how long. He told me the hospital had changed quite a bit since he arrived, which I interpreted as a sign that he had been admitted for a considerable period and had witnessed renovations and changes to the environment. He told me that sometimes people saw him and sometimes they didn't. "What do you mean they didn't see you?" I asked. "They walked past me." He made a vague gesture with his hand. "They looked around and didn't see me. Sometimes I tried to talk and they didn't hear me." A pause. "You heard me." "Of course I hear you," I said. "You're right in front of me." He looked at me for a long moment with that expression. I was beginning to recognize not quite pity, not quite patience, but a combination of both. Like someone who knows something the other person hasn't yet understood and is deciding how to explain it without causing harm. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm talking to you." I should have asked more, should have pushed, should have gone deeper. But there was something in the way he said it that left me with a strange feeling that pressing further in that moment would be a kind of violation, like opening a door without knocking. So I stayed quiet, and he did too. And in that silence, the corridor flickered 3 times in a row. And on the third flash, I swear I saw, for less than a second, a shadow at the end of the hallway that was not the shadow of anything that should have been there. I did not sleep that night. The CPS representative arrived at 4:20 a.m., later than promised, as always. He was a man of about 50, tired, with the look of someone who had been woken from deep sleep and hadn't fully processed where he was yet. He took the form I had filled out, looked at Gabriel with a mixture of professional concern and bewilderment, and said he would take him to the overnight residential placement while they investigated the child's origins. Gabriel stood from the chair without complaint, took the man's hand with that strange, exhausted deference. But before turning to leave, he looked at me one last time. "You'll be thinking about me today," he said, not with arrogance, not as a threat, with that quiet certainty of someone stating a meteorological fact. "And when you come in for your shift tomorrow night, I'll be here." "You'll be at the residential placement," I said. He gave something that was almost a smile, just the right corner of his mouth, just for a second. "No," he said, "I'll be here." And he walked away down the corridor with the CPS representative, those small footsteps echoing in the unstable light until they turned the corner and disappeared. I spent the rest of the shift with the uncomfortable certainty that he was right. If you made it this far, you already know. This story doesn't end that night. What happened in the following nights? What I discovered about Gabriel, about what truly exists in the second basement, about what that shadow in the corridor was, changes everything you just read. It reframes the meaning of every detail. And I need you here when I tell it. Subscribe now. Hit the bell, because part 2 goes up soon. And if you're not here, you'll miss the moment when everything starts making sense in a way that's so much worse than not knowing. Part 2 has a detail that, when I found it, made me go back to the very beginning of that whole night and understand that I had seen the sign from the start and didn't notice.